The Y Curve with Phil Dobbie and Roger Hearing.
Is the Tory party imploding?
It's dangerous. And you know what? Even Jeremy Corbyn didn't suggest that we should go that far.
Very briefly. Too many chancellors have had too many fiscal rules that they have then had to ditch because they haven't been able to meet them.
Well, we know that Rishi didn't see eye to eye with Boris, but it seems he's also had difficulty with the other contenders for the top job as well.
But I think people listening at home will be looking at us debating these issues, and it seems that we're removed from the real problems that they are facing. They need some immediate action now. I don't understand why Rishi doesn't accept that.
Rishi thinks splashing cash won't be good for controlling inflation.
That's because inflation is the enemy that makes everybody poorer. It erodes savings, reduces living standards, and raises mortgage rates.
You can also devalue your debt as well, of course, but that is just a small benefit against a rather large problem of an inflation rate, which is now at 9.4%. But most of the other contenders in the process so far seem like they were less concerned about inflation. They just wanted to see taxes come down.
I've already set out plans to cut tax, which is why I didn't vote for the national insurance rise, and I've already set out plans to cut the fuel duty. The essential thing for all of us now is to set out an agenda that will see us able to deliver a growing economy.
But the disagreements on the ITV debate on Sunday night became very heated. It's hard to imagine they were in the same political party. There was this.
The fact is that raising taxes at this moment will choke off economic growth in order to prevent us getting the revenue we need to pay off the debt.
And this.
And you know what? This something-for-nothing economics isn't conservative, it's socialism.
Under your plans, we are predicted to have a recession because you have raised tax. It is cutting back on growth.
And it just didn't get any better as Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, the last two left standing now, were fighting it out on national television.
And I do have a plan for growth, and it involves three things: investment, innovation and education. And if we can get all of that right, that's how we drive growth.
If Rishi has got this great plan for growth, why haven't we seen it in his last 2.5 years at the Treasury?
It is a Tory party divided on tax. Do we roll back some of the recent tax hikes so there's more money in people's pockets, which is what Liz Truss wants to do? Or are we worried that increasing spending will only add to inflation, which is Rishi's point of view? Interesting times when the Tory party isn't united on cutting tax. But which is the right thing to do right now? We'll look at all of that this week on The Y Curve.
The Y Curve.
So, tax. I mean, nobody likes it, obviously. We all pay it. Well, let's assume everybody does, including members of the government. But I suppose the point is...
And their wives.
And their wives. Well, yes, quite. Let's not even go there. But the point, I suppose, in all this is Tories, traditionally, low tax. That's been their thing.
Yeah.
And yet...
Here's Rishi doing the opposite.
Well, exactly. And it's not just Rishi. Actually, I was looking back over the stats. Margaret Thatcher, at the end of her time in power... It was a much higher tax take, proportionally to GDP, than it was at the beginning.
Well, it is this slavish adherence, isn't it, to this idea that, well, we need to pay for, the government spending. It's fiscal conservatism, which is the expression they like to use. And if we can't balance the books, and we are a long way away from balancing the books, then we need to do something about it. The question is timing. Is this because we are going through very difficult times, the cost of living crisis? Is this the right time? Even if it was the thing you needed to do, is it the thing you do right now?
Well, let me put on a conservative hat. It doesn't fit me very well, but I'll put it on anyway and say, OK, unless people have more of their own money to spend and invest, they will not grow the economy. They will not put the money into building factories, into setting up businesses, into doing all that kind of thing. Outsiders will not come to invest in this country if they think they're going to lose a lot of their money in tax. And those kind of things generate national income, which is what we need to actually keep us going in the first place.
Right, but as I said, it's all a question of timing. This might be a big surprise to you when you're just about to go through a major economic downturn. There's not a lot of investment going on anyway. So really, you've got to bunker down, get through the period and look after the people who are struggling the most. So you come out the other side. Then you can say, OK, now we've been through the worst of it. How do we look at growth?
Yeah, but you look at timing. But people said that during the COVID, of course. And even before that, we had a period of austerity. We've had lots of things, moments of business. Well, it's not quite right now. Let's tax, yes. Not now, later, when we can afford it. And we never can. We never feel that we can. That's almost inevitable.
Right. And then the big question as well, and, there's so much to talk about on the programme today. And we've, as always, we're bringing in someone from outside because very quickly we run out of the extent of our own expertise. But
I do. You're more on this than I am.
But I mean, the big concern is, is that balancing of the budget and how important is it? And that's a big question because you look at lots of economies, like the United States has hardly ever actually had a budget surplus, and there are people like the modern monetary theorists who argue that if you have a budget surplus, you're actually pulling money out of the economy. It's actually the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yes.
You're actually reducing the money supply.
Neo-Keynesianism, I think, is probably the other way of putting it. Anyway, we know only a certain amount of this. Someone who knows an awful lot more is our guest today, Simon French, Chief Economist at Panmure Gordon, and he joins us now.
All right, so Simon, clearly Rishi Sunak has got it in his mind that he wants to try and claw back some of that, massive government debt that we've incurred over the last couple of years and try and get the budget back into to at least balance or, hopefully at some point start paying back. But, the question mark, it's all in timing, isn't it? That might be the right thing to do, perhaps, but do you do it when it looks like the country is either in or quickly heading towards a recession? Isn't this the time to be spending rather than cutting back?
Well, I think it's exactly the right question. I wish all questions at the moment were as eloquently put as that.
We always start well and go downhill, by the way.
But there are some very respectable arguments, I believe, that you want to be fiscally activist, to use the jargon, so expanding the UK budget deficit at this time because you feel the economy is heading into a very, very difficult few quarters. If you think there is a hard economic landing looming, then you might want to get ahead of that by big fiscal expansion to support both the household and the corporate sector. I personally don't foresee that. I think there's already been about £37 billion worth of direct payments promised to households. And I do think that the relative strength of the labour market, the relative strength of household balance sheets going into this period means that this sort of fiscal fine-tuning, which has got a fairly checkered macroeconomic history, is not to be recommended at this time. But there are and final thing I would say, there are some very respected economists, ones that I respect, who see things very differently and are calling for more, if you like, economic cycle managing sort of tax cuts.
Right. I mean, let's pick up on that idea of tax cuts, because obviously this has been the big thing in the Tory leadership debate, the thing they've been focusing on. Tories are a low tax party and all the rest. But at the basic root of this, in a way, looking away from current circumstances, Simon, do tax cuts actually help an economy? And I know this is an enormous area. We could talk about Ricardian convergence and Laffer curves and God knows what. But does it actually work? I mean, what's the history of this?
It does. One of the problems with answering the question, Roger, is the evidence is relatively mixed, and a lot of the evidence that is presented is by people academics who have an ideological either aversion to a smaller state or indeed a larger state, and tax being the flip side of that. I would say that what the tax environment tells you about an economy is only partly what encourages growth. A consistent, if you like, set of supply-side features, be it labour market regulation, product market regulation, consistent trading relationships and legal relationships with your nearest trading partners, for example. Those are the type of things that generate sustainable growth over the long term and where the empirical evidence is much stronger. I think changing the marginal rate of tax to try and promote a longer-term, faster economic growth rate does not have a huge amount of merit.
Is this the time for long-term thinking, though? Because, we are going through a recession, more than likely. We certainly know that there's a cost of living crisis where people at the bottom end are seeing their wages increase very little while the cost of living is shooting up, and they, need more money. And, of course, they are the people, if they had more money, would spend it straight away. So the velocity of money, the speed at which money is circulating around the economy would be that much faster if money found its way into their hands. So there is a redistribution exercise, and it doesn't need to be a long-term redistribution exercise. And I wonder whether that is part of the difference between Rishi and the other contenders this week, that Rishi seems to be slavishly adhering to this idea that they've got to get the budget back into surplus. Everyone else is saying, well, hang on a second, there's something going on here, that we've got to get over this hump. We're not out of the dark days yet. We need to help people get through it. And that is a different philosophy, isn't it?
It is a different philosophy, although I would, and I'm no champion specifically of any candidate, and Rishi Sunak's view is that having provided £37 billion, as I mentioned previously, of direct support for households so far in his February and May support packages, there is a degree of, if you like, risk sharing going on now between the state and the individual to deal with an exogenous shock that I think he's being very honest by saying that no government can fully insulate, nor should indeed fully insulate, the entire household sector from the impact of what is a 6x increase in the wholesale gas price in the UK that's going to pass through to a trebling of dual fuel bills. And the reality is that some of the tax proposals being put forward by other candidates would actually, rather than being very targeted, and I think your question is well made in terms of the targeting of support, if you reversed, for example, the national insurance increase, that would actually be the biggest benefits would be given to the richest cohorts in the UK, who we already know have the largest amount of savings, the largest amount of assets to draw down and to be able to, if you like, consumption smooth through this period. So I'm not entirely sure that some of the other tax proposals have the degree of targeting that you are alluding to.
Well, I'm surprised no one has pointed to what seems like the obvious solution, and it's because this is a short-term problem we've got. We don't want to, we don't need to look for a long-term solution in tax right now. We just need to look at how we get over the next year or perhaps 2 years, and for those people who are consuming the most. As a proportion of their income, how do we make life easier for them? Isn't it obvious that you just drop VAT for a while, maybe halve it for a year?
But the biggest benefits of a reduction in VAT would be the richest in society, who consume a much larger proportion through discretionary items that are full 20% VAT. Now, VAT is a very effective tax cut. It was done after the global financial crisis in the UK by the then Chancellor Alistair Darling. It did have a success of stimulating demand. But this isn't at the moment, in my judgment, and it is just my judgment, a demand-efficient economy that requires middle and higher income cohorts to spend more. If I were to go for an optimal change in the tax rate at the moment, I would actually reduce further the taper rate on universal credit, which is in effect putting a more targeted amount of support to the lowest income cohort, but also potentially reintroduce the £25 a week universal credit, which was introduced during the pandemic. But I have to say there's some institutional reluctance to do some short-term proposals that it's politically very hard to then make the argument they're unwound.
But this is kind of forgive me, this is kind of tinkering with, it's twiddling the dials in a way, at a point where, as you said, it's an exogenous shock we've got. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, for example, whether Putin is going to keep the gas pipes closed to Western Europe. We don't know what's going to happen in China, how long the shutdowns there are going to continue. Is it really worth making these kind of changes at this stage, given how much we don't know?
And can I partially answer that? And you can tell me whether I'm wrong or not, Simon. But we do want to cut back demand. And that was the point I was going to make from your last observation, that it's the top end of society. We want to cut their consumption down.
Yeah, because the demand from the bottom end, we do want to keep going.
Well, I mean, they have to live, don't they?
Well, exactly.
They've got to eat. But it's the top end. We don't want people buying yachts or expensive items that are going to just keep on pushing inflation higher. We want to see demand destruction, but not in a way that is going to harm the entire population. Surely that's how we get through this.
Yes, albeit that there is already some evidence of top-end demand destruction, because being exposed to financial assets disproportionately. Financial markets have sold off quite aggressively, as you're both well aware, since the start of the year. And that is starting to have a negative wealth effect, albeit more obviously amongst US consumers, it has to be said, than the UK consumer. And actually, US has been a big part of that exceptional demand for consumer durables that took place during the pandemic and has so stressed supply chains and has helped contribute to this big inflationary surge, which is global. Back to Roger's question on, should we be trying to micromanage the economy when there's such radical uncertainty out there? I think that's a very valid question. I think the problem is, if you like, the scale of this shock we're not talking about, a movement. I'm not a massive fan of quoting price movements and standard deviations, but I will just give you one, which is it was a 16 standard deviation movement in the European gas price on the onset of the war in Ukraine. And that is an extraordinarily difficult thing for households and businesses to try and absorb. So the state does have to step in, but the scale of how much it steps in or how much it doesn't step in is ultimately and always is a political more than an economic judgment.
Yeah, but I mean, it was crazy, wasn't it, when we started paying out money to people who were struggling, and we gave them some benefits to cover their energy bill based on income, but then every household got £400 as well. So Rishi's household got £400. I mean, that just seems like a waste of government money.
And this was the criticism that I levelled at the package that was unveiled in February. I thought, if you like, stung by that criticism, the May package, because this came in two lots in the UK, the May package was more targeted. It did acknowledge that, if you like, the targeting was insufficient in February, given how damaging. And those choices, let's be very clear, because sometimes we make it quite impersonal. Economists particularly make these events quite impersonal. This is a choice for a lot of perhaps the bottom 20% of UK families going into this winter. This will be a choice between heating and eating. Now, that's a bit of a journalistic soundbite, but it perhaps makes it real, the kind of choices that are going to be made without very targeted support at the bottom end of the income distribution.
Right. And all of that targeting makes sense. The reason why I talked about VAT, and you're right, it obviously it benefits everybody, and those people who are spending more actually are saving the most from it. But it was just this question of pinpointing those people who are in most need. I mean, in
fiscal terms, what could you do to pinpoint them?
Yeah. How do you reach them? How do you say, well, we know exactly who the bottom 20% are?
Well, there's two sets of groups. There's the low earners where they interact, where their earnings interact with the universal credit system, reducing the taper rate, so the scale at which benefits are withdrawn as their income goes up, is a very effective way for that group of increasing their take-home pay, which of course is the most relevant metric. But there are groups for whom they don't have employment income for a variety of reasons, sometimes caring, sometimes long-term sickness, and therefore there does need to be, I believe, additional support through the benefits system. The problem, as I alluded to, is this becomes intensely political to provide that support temporarily and take it away. This £25 universal credit is totemic amongst Conservative ministers.
Well, yeah, it became a huge issue, didn't it? And really almost out of proportion. You can understand why it is important, because it is that the lifeline for the poorest. But nonetheless, once you get all the politics laid on it, I mean, do you think that actually is something that would provide concrete long-term benefit for people?
Yes, because I think when you look at the lifetime outcomes of people who have experienced very real poverty conditions in youth, their education outcomes are worse. There is a long-term productivity legacy of periods of time which children, through either malnutrition or not being able to experience the various opportunities that they need to in a holistic sense when they're learning. That long-term impact, which will be very much felt this winter based on the projections I and others have for the impact on low-income family spending power. Yes, I do think there is a strong fiscal or economic and indeed social case for intervention.
The answer about, how do you stop it? Well, the answer is clearly that you don't, do you? If you feel as though you're spending, that is too much money, you don't want to keep spending it, it can still be there. You've got so many instruments that you can move. You can move tax thresholds, for example, or you can change other elements of welfare.
It all comes out of one pot. I mean, let me put my ill-fitting Tory head on at the moment and say, magic money tree. Fiscal headroom? I've heard that a lot.
Even if you went down that way, though, and said, well, there is no magic money tree and we need to make sure we're just spending the same amount of money, how you cut that up? I mean,
but all we're talking about, I mean, the £25 sounds like nothing at all, but in terms of the actual amount of money it costs the Treasury, it costs the taxpayer...
That's £6 billion.
Yeah, which is substantial.
So don't move tax thresholds up for a few years. Just allow inflation creep to claw money back that way.
Which already is happening. Yeah. This fiscal drag by freezing the income tax thresholds for 3 years is now going to be far more significant because of the pickup in inflation. I think just the point that really, really frustrates me is this idea, this, if you like, artificial concept of headroom. Headroom is something that falls out of the various fiscal rules. And this isn't a political comment on Rishi Sunak or Nadeem Zahawi or Sajid Javid or Philip Hammond. It's all chancellors of the last 20, 30 years have introduced these fiscal rules and then approached, that, if you like, that headroom as somewhat of something of a science. It isn't science. It's at best an art form. The reality is, and I speak from having been 12 years in government.
You were actually in the Treasury, weren't you?
Yes, a government economist. And what is important is not the quantity of public spending, it is the quality of public spending. And we obsess over quantity when, in fact, there are very, very strong, respectable, indeed progressive economic arguments for running persistent deficits if those deficits are used to increase your long-term trend economic growth performance.
There'll be modern monetary theorists jumping up and down in excitement as you say this. Yeah, because of course that is what they're saying. If you're continually running a deficit, you're actually expanding the money supply, and that's helping the economy.
Yeah, but let me inject a little bit of more old-fashioned, the old-fashioned monetary theory in that sense of saying you talk about, Simon, deficits being sustainable in that way, but is there no traction in the idea that's of sound money? I mean, let's bring that term back. The idea that actually a massive deficit is a problem for a country. Are you just saying that isn't really the case?
But I am preaching sound money. I'm preaching the kind of sound money that any respectable CFO that you got on this podcast would talk about, which is the quality of spending. Have they found investment opportunities with a hurdle rate over and above their cost of capital? And bear in mind, even with the turbulence in the bond market, the cost of capital for governments around the world, still in real terms and even in nominal terms, is still very low. If we can identify good projects, be they in education, social support, capital infrastructure, intangible investment, then why should a public sector with the ability to borrow in its own currency not do those deficits? The problem, if you like, with modern monetary theory, it's been adopted by
a cult,
if you like, a cult of people.
Yeah, most notably Sri Lanka, just saying. I mean, that's a country that's falling on its flat feet, and MMT was very much part of that.
Well, like everything, it's by degrees, though, isn't it? It's the extent to which you drive it.
And if it therefore goes hand in hand with, if you like, avoiding the difficult economic decisions on what to fund and what not to fund, then modern monetary theory falls flat on its face. The problem is modern monetary theory is, I think, has merit if it goes hand in hand with good quality financial decision making. The problem is it's associated with bad.
It's seen as a no end of free money rather than, how can we get a return on this extra money in effect that we're creating for the economy? And that's where I think people tend to lose their focus a little bit, isn't it? But with Rishi Sunak, it seems to be very, and I'd be interested, I've got another question which I'll say you can answer later about how well you'd get on with Rishi Sunak if you were still working in the Treasury right now. But Rishi Sunak does seem to be set on this idea that if we put any more money into the economy, that is just going to make inflation worse. So we've got to, and that means that the Bank of England is going to put interest rates up more, which means everybody is going to suffer. Is he right with that line of thinking, or does it get back to your point? Well, it depends on how you spend that money.
Well, it's sound economics that if you run a looser fiscal policy at the margin, monetary policy will need to be tighter. But I always make 2 points when these issues are raised. First of all, I do mean at the margin, because what will be generated with some of the tax proposals that are on offer in terms of additional inflation won't quite get lost in the rounding, but close to get lost in the rounding, given the scale of the exogenous inflationary shock through the energy route and increasingly through the food route. And therefore, I think we need to talk about magnitudes of the inflation. And then secondly, and you talked about this in your question, which is how you target tax cuts will determine what scale of inflationary blowback you will get. So, for example, should you provide a considerable tax cut to the likes of myself, who are decent income, very decent income, and I will spend that additional, let's say a VAT cut on discretionary spending in areas that already have supply constraints on either consumer durables or the hospitality sector, that will just bid up prices, and inflation, the blowback will be quite considerable. Whereas if you target that tax cut on those for whom effectively 100% of that goes through to consumer staples, and quite price inelastic consumer staples, at least domestic demand won't affect their price, then your inflationary blowback will be far less significant.
Yeah, well, it's well paid, clearly very well paid people like you. I didn't realise quite until you brought it up. I didn't realise quite how much money you were earning there, Simon. But I mean, it's enormously wealthy people like yourself. We don't want you to, use up quite so much energy as well. I mean, that's we want the energy that we have available to go to heating the homes through winter of those people who are struggling to get by, whereas you could turn off the air conditioning in the fourth spare bedroom,
or head to the south of France.
You will be pleased to know, Phil, that I have been walking around the house turning the thermostat down for many, many years, and I will continue to do that, perhaps even more vigorously this winter.
All part of sound economics on the domestic front as everything else.
All part of being from Yorkshire originally, actually, Roger.
Well, that helps.
Yes, well, of course, where Rishi Sunak, of course, represents a constituency, which kind of brings us, I think, to the point Phil was trying to make.
Exactly. Would you get on with
Are you impressed? I mean, you've worked with chancellors. Do you think Rishi's a good one? Would he be good as a prime minister as well?
I respect his competence. People who I did work with are of the view that he is very diligent and very competent and very honest. And if you want diligent, competent and honest as a successor to the current Prime Minister, then I think that is a improved scorecard. And that's as diplomatic as I can possibly be.
Yes, I think we can all gloss that and say we know what we're talking about.
Is that enough? Yeah, I mean, and has he got... he's got a lot of experience, but is it the right experience as well? I mean, I guess, is he too ideological is the question.
I don't think so. I think he is, from what I've heard, he is evidence-led, but he will challenge that evidence when it is presented to him by officials within the Treasury or external stakeholders who come and present their analysis. I don't have a perfect crystal ball on what he would be like as a leader, and certainly some of the challenges are that he hasn't set out a conservative vision of a smaller state, a lower tax take. But I do, if you like, somewhat push back against those, and I think they are lazy parallels with the early 1980s and, if you like, the first two terms of the Thatcher government. There were very, very different demographics in the UK, where the baby boomers were coming into their prime earning years, their prime tax-paying years, and that's a very different demographic backdrop today. And also the revenues from North Sea oil and gas were approaching their peak. And you put those two things together, and the ability to, if you like, revisit those economic conditions is the economics of fantasy, unfortunately, not the economics of reality.
And we also weren't as highly leveraged as we are now back then as well.
And it was pre the big boom, of course, in the city, and in terms of confidence of city institutions. Then a very important part, I remember, and I'm that old, was that was the feeling that at least the government had the right ideas about the economy. I mean, again, you're in the city? Is Rishi someone that they would welcome in the top seat?
Versus the other, as we speak, three candidates, then I think yes, absolutely. But you're also right, Roger. Your questions are excellent. The point being that coming off the back of the 1970s, when there were very, very high and prohibitive marginal tax rates, you said I couldn't talk about Lafferism, but I will mention Arthur Laffer.
the laughable curve.
Well, the Laffer curve. We should just say, for those perhaps who are not students of economy, it's the idea that tax cuts basically boost the economy. And
Donald Trump tried it, didn't he? Most recently, by saying if we have tax cuts for the wealthy, they will invest that extra money, and that will create the jobs, which means you'll get more tax at the end of the day.
Famously drawn on a napkin at a dinner with senior Republicans.
Any evidence anywhere in the world of that ever working, Simon?
Yes, I would say the early 1980s UK, when marginal tax rates
was so
in some
high.
cases were so high that bringing them down did stop what was quite distortionary activity.
But that was an extreme. That was an extreme.
Correct. You are moving off an extreme, and I think that is the difference this time round. Is although the overall tax burden has moved to levels we won't see or haven't seen since the late 1940s, actually those marginal tax rates for almost all cohorts are still certainly modest compared to what we saw at the back end of the 1970s, and therefore your ability to, if you like, employ Lafferism is far more constrained, in my professional view.
Do you know what? I've enjoyed talking to you the last 25 minutes or so I don't care if anyone else is listening or not. We've had a good time.
No, it's been excellent.
And we've got so many more questions as well, so we've got to get you back on again if that's okay with you.
I'd be delighted to join you both again.
Simon, thank you so much for joining us there. Simon French there, Chief Economist at Panmure Gordon, joining us here on the Y Curve.
Well, next week on the Y Curve, do you know what? We don't know yet. We haven't got a clue, do we?
I mean, Phil had it written on a bit of paper, but unfortunately on the way in he dropped it. It's under the table somewhere. When we find it, we'll tell you.
In truth, we haven't got a clue. But that is the whole idea of the Y Curve, that we are whatever the topic of the week is. So
we've hit it pretty well so far, but it will be exciting, and we will be diving into. Yes, it will.
We'll try exciting. We'll see if it works.
We'll dive into one of the key subjects and interrogate it and attempt to answer the why question.
By the way, before we go today, if you go to the website ycurve.com, there's a little microphone icon on it. You can click on that microphone icon and you can record a message. So if you've got a question, or if you'd like to be featured on the Y Curve,
or you'd like to tell us what you think of it all,
exactly, yeah. If you're brutally honest, we might not play it, but if you're very nice, we might. But I mean, if you've got a specific point about today's podcast or previous podcasts, or you've got topics you'd like us to cover off in future episodes, then use that little microphone icon at ycurve.com.
Indeed, and go there and look at all the old podcasts as well, all the ones that we've recorded already.
There's half a dozen of them.
Yes,
exactly.
Worth a dive into.
So we'll catch you again soon. Thanks for listening.
That's it from us. Bye-bye.
The Y Curve.